Last year in 2020, along with Tyler Hoover and Freddie Hernandez, I shot 3 series of a show we call Car Trek. And in it, we get to live out our Top Gear fantasy with a challenge coming from the sponsor AutoTempest for us to find and buy some certain kind of car and then use them in a series of challenges. And we bought some amazing cars for each of the series, but unfortunately, due to space constraints, time constraints, money constraints, and patience constraints, we weren't able to keep them all. And so I thought I'd take a few minutes today and let you all know where each of the cars ended up. And most of those updates actually come from the VinWiki app, which we made as a way for you to keep track of what you know about a car, what you learn about a car, and how you use a car, and then to be able to follow it to see where it goes from here. So if you haven't already, please download that app. But we have to thank AutoTempest for their support of Car Trek. It is the way that we search for cars. In fact, I just bought my car for Car Trek 4 yesterday after finding it through AutoTempest. And so I'm very excited to start shooting that in a few weeks. But if you don't already use AutoTempest, be sure to check them out at the link in the description below. And if you're not currently looking for a car, then you're probably, if you're watching this video, the kind of person that all your friends come to for advice on cars. And in all likelihood, they haven't heard about AutoTempest just yet. So tell them about AutoTempest and let them know that it's the smartest and most powerful tool to find their next car. It allows them to search all the major listing sites at the same time and make it easier than ever to find the car of your dreams. And so for our first Car Trek series, which we shot last spring around the Amelia Island Concours, our goal was to find the coolest car we could for the price of a C8 Corvette. And we ended up with a Lamborghini Gallardo Spider, a Ferrari 360 Spider, and an Aston Martin V12 Vantage S. My car was a 2006 flood title gated manual car, one of about 80 in the US, and I absolutely loved it. It acted up a lot throughout the trip, and honestly it was touch and go all the way up to the start as to whether or not it was actually gonna make it. But I did end up losing the challenges with that car, and so I was forced as a penalty to list my car for sale on AutoTempest, which I did with an absolutely exorbitant and unreasonable price, which fortunately no one has paid. So I still own my car. I love it dearly. But I did sell the backup car because, as I said, it barely made it to be ready to go down to Orlando where we started from in Freddie's shop. And so I guess it was on Thursday before I departed on Saturday, I bought another Lamborghini Gallardo Spider. It was a later car, a 2010 LP 560 Spider with right around 100,000 miles, a real basket case. That next day, the Friday, I had to put brakes and tires on it to have it as an option. But fortunately, the gated car, which was my preference, and I'm very glad that that's the one I get to keep, got ready. And so when I got back, I actually listed that car for sale, the LP 560, and I sold it rather quickly to a guy in Houston. He came here, bought it, road tripped it back to Texas, and seemed to be enjoying it. Racked up some more miles, posted a bit about it in the VinWiki app, and has recently listed it back for sale. So I'm not sure if it has sold yet, but it was recently back on the market. Now for that first Car Trek series, Tyler's car was a yellow Ferrari 360 Spider, and it was having some transmission issues. The clutch was certainly worn, the top wasn't really working very well, but he was not that interested in keeping that car, honestly, from day one. And so before it even made its way back to Kansas, he had already sold it to a local YouTuber there, and so there's been more content made with that car, and we're excited to see where it goes from here. Now, Freddie's car was also pretty interesting. It was a 2015 Aston Martin V12 Vantage S. It's an awesome car. Now, Freddie's dream car was an Aston Martin, but it was not a V12 Vantage S. It was a DBS, and shortly after he got that car back home to the Orlando area, the dealer where he had bought the V12 Vantage S got his dream spec DBS in. 2009 manual transmission Casino Royale Gray. Absolutely gorgeous. I cannot fault him for loving that. Now, he traded the Vantage and some money for the DBS and ended up owning his dream car. In fact, the first time Freddie had ever bought a car that was functional on the day that he purchased it. And so he's in love with that car and having a lot of fun with it. Now, the dealer continued to market that car, even though we had obviously documented its immediate need for a clutch and a power steering pump. And apparently they sold it because one of our VinWiki users has spotted it being driven around in the Seattle area. So that car has made it to the Pacific Northwest somehow. And so those were the 4 cars for Car Trek 1. For Car Trek 2, which we shot out in Las Vegas, the premise was who could buy the most appreciated supercar. I bought an Aston Martin Vanquish, Freddie bought a Maserati Coupe GT, And Tyler bought a Mercedes-Benz CL65 AMG. The Vanquish was mine. It was a 2003 car, and it had spent a considerable portion of its life in Colombia. So it was really, really rough, barely ran. I did spend a good bit of money on it, getting it ready to head out to Vegas, but a really, really cool car and massively depreciated. When we got back, Freddie insisted on buying that car from me. And so he still has it. He has plans to maybe stick swap it or do something else with the car. They're just not that reliable, even in well-maintained stock form, and so that one was never going to be one to be counted on. It broke constantly throughout the trip. It was usually running on half its motor. Of course, we were in Las Vegas during quite literally the hottest week ever recorded on Earth. In Death Valley that week, it was about 134 degrees, which I think in recorded history is the highest temperature that's ever been reached on Earth, where we could actually film. They wouldn't let us film in Death Valley, even though we had planned to. It was about 125 degrees, and so none of the cars liked it. The Vanquish certainly the least. And so that one is still with Freddie. He drove it home from my house after we trailered it back. And so I'm glad that one kind of stayed in the family. Now Tyler's CL65 had some issues. The door was broken. It was in limp mode periodically when he got it back, and he did a little bit more work to it with the help of the wizard. But unfortunately, it was never made to run quite right. He recently made a video with that car and his Bentley explaining that he was just going to give up on both of them. And in fact, that video was seen by Alex Palmieri of Legit Street Cars, good friend of the VinWiki channel and a lover of all aging AMG products. And so he just bought that car last week and has taken it back home near Chicago, and he is going to make it perfect, as he tends to with his cars. So I'm excited to be able to follow that along. Honestly, when a YouTuber ends up buying the cars, it's really, really cool because we get to continue to see content being made with the Car Trek alumni cars, or whatever you want to call them. Now, that also happened to the Maserati. Now, in the series, as John Ficarra appraised all three cars, he offered Freddie $5,000 for the Maserati. And around the same time, Tyler had gotten contacted by another local Wichita-based YouTuber, Elliot Alvis, about his interest in buying the Maserati. He'd seen posts on Instagram and things like that. And so even though Ficarra had agreed to buy it, that became a more interesting offer as soon as John saw the BMW M6 and thought about the realistic possibility of him having to drive either of those cars all the way back to his home in northeastern California. And so he ended up buying the M6, which was the backup car for that series. When we're buying these unreliable cars, obviously we know there's a good chance that one or more of them is going to break. And honestly, the Vantage was making such a terrible noise and leaking so badly from the shift actuator at the start of Car Trek 1, we had thought about going and getting the backup Gallardo for that to be Freddie's car, or trying to buy another Aston Martin locally. Fortunately, Freddie and Jared made an absolutely heroic repair to the hydraulic system for the transmission of the Vantage, and it was able to participate. But it was a really, really close call. And so for 2 and 3, we decided to buy a car that could sub in at any moment as a fourth option. And so the M6 was kind of perfect for that, over 90% depreciated, and actually a pretty decent car. It had a new clutch at the time. Of course, Freddie became the recipient of that when the Maserati caught fire, but he ended up abusing it terribly. But it still almost made it back to John's house. It broke down on the way, and then he ended up listing it in our VinWiki car flipping contest facilitated by Dream Car Exchange. And so it's found a new home somewhere in the Northeast, and I guess is still running and under its own power. John did a good bit of work sorting it back out, putting a lot of pieces that had not been reinstalled after some other repairs. And you know, the engine had been resealed and it had a lot of the stuff going through, but a 140,000 mile M6 was never going to be a dependable car. And so he called me an hour after he'd left and said he'd broken down at some gas station, but he was able to limp it home, made it nice, sold it, and actually made a little bit of profit on it. But back to the Maserati, Elliot Alvis, Tyler's friend, ended up buying that car, has made some great content with it, has made it a much nicer version of itself, while fortunately maintaining its Car Trek absolutely atrocious wrap that Freddie had installed. And so I'm glad to be able to continue to see content with that one there. Now for Car Trek 3, the premise was that we were going to Secret Santa style buy each other the most unreliable cars on Earth. And so Freddie bought me, after I had made tremendous fun of his Maserati and all the stereotypes of Maserati owners, he bought me a Maserati, a 2005 Quattroporte Neiman Marcus edition that was named Mona. And I jumped the car too heavily, broke the radiator, slid it into a tree, but it was the only car to survive the entire trip. And so it was a little bit banged up on the nose. Actually, the bumper is going to make its way into the VinWiki set fairly soon. And so that one didn't do so well, but it did at least make it to the finish line. The other two cars were not so lucky. Tyler had given Freddie a 1986 Rolls-Royce Silver Spur that was an absolute biohazard, smelled terrible, barely ran, and certainly didn't brake reliably. And so it wouldn't stop under its own power for most of the event. That led to some issues, and it also was not running under its own power at the end. Tyler's car, which was my Christmas present to him, was a 2007 Audi S8. Notoriously unreliable, and this one was a particularly terrible example. It already had a bunch of error lights on. The rest of them came on throughout the filming. The suspension had collapsed. It started to leak a lot of oil. It was an absolute basket case. And then the backup car, which became his car that we had all agreed to have around, was a Fleetwood Cadillac. And it became Tyler's and immediately blew a head gasket. And so that's what the North Stars do, and it did it in rather impressive fashion. And so that car was also out, and so that's why we all ended up finishing in Mona the Maserati. Now, the appraiser who had come to look at all the cars was John from J&J Auto Wrecking, and he had made us an offer for all of them, and quite honestly, none of us had a whole lot of interest in continuing to own them. I did fall in love with driving Mona, but I also knew that getting it back here and ever back into any kind of form of reliable shape was never going to be realistic. In addition to the continuing leaking radiator, which would have been a relatively easy fix if you could buy a radiator, which we couldn't in the middle of Missouri. It also had every error light on and dinging. Honestly, the only thing that really worked reliably was the transmission, which is obviously against all odds for that car. And so all of those cars made their way to Ohio with J&J, and they have parted out the S8, and they have not decided exactly what they're going to do with the Rolls and with Mona the Maserati. There's a few parts that it certainly needs to look more presentable, but they told me that they were going to try to restore it. They have the Cadillac, they have the Rolls, and so those will either be parted out or potentially fixed. It would be an uphill battle and certainly not financially viable for any of them, but you never know. And so those are the 12 cars that we used for Car Trek in 2020. We're going to do multiple seasons this year, and I think you're absolutely going to love the first one. We're going to start shooting it in March and probably release it sometime around May. But be sure to follow all those cars in the VinWiki app. Let us know which of them were your favorite in the comments, and please subscribe here and to Tyler's channel and to Freddie's channel for more Car Trek content in 2021. Carly offers more assistance and functionality than standard OBD scanners. It's really a workshop level tool that gives you diagnostic capability to figure out what your car is trying to tell you. But beyond that, particularly for BMWs and Volkswagen products, Carly gives you the ability to code things into your car to customize it to your liking. If you went to a shop or a dealership, each of these codes might cost $50 or more. But with Carly, you can code unlimited things into compatible cars with their license. So check out the link in the description below, use VinWiki for a discount, and unlock your car's potential. You can also check used cars as you buy them for odometer discrepancies and mechanical issues. Carly is the perfect investment for anyone who cares about their cars.